Good morning, folks. A friend and colleague of Mario's, Mr. Jim Gleason, a friend and colleague of about 50 years. Mr. Jim Gleason is going to say a few words at this point. After he is done, I'm going to come back up and just give a few instructions about how we're going to church.
44 years, not 50, but with Mario, it seems like 50. I just want to say what an honor it is to be able to talk about and give testimony to the life and impact that Mario had on so many people, many of whom are no longer in the local area, but I've talked to a couple of them recently, and they all have the same stories. And so if I may, especially, how many are worker colleagues of Mario's here? Anybody? Good. Okay, that's good, because I won't be wasting words that they know on them. But to the family, I don't know how you saw Mario, but if I go back to 1969 when I joined what was then Sperry, all the names have changed over time to eventually Unisys. I was a young kid coming out of teaching mathematics and into the computer industry at the time where everybody was joining the industry. It was a great time, what a pioneering time. And so Mario was over in Manhattan, and he was like the traffic cop over the marketing people to make sure what they were committing to would actually work when a customer bought it. And in those days, I mean, we're not talking personal computers. We're not talking about iPods and iPhones. We're talking about $20, $50 million computers that you couldn't buy. You could only rent. And so when a deal was made, you're talking big bucks. He was responsible to make sure that we in a local office, our technicians who worked for the marketing team, didn't overcommit to something because the marketeers said, you got to do this, you got to do this. And so my first contact with Mario was one of those presentations where he came in to review to make sure the proposal we were putting together for New Jersey State Police really would work. I was trying on my way over here to envision how to represent him. If you think of the Russian bear, that was Mario, right? Fearsome, challenging, not really big, right? But that's the Mario we knew. And when he came in, he actually drew people to tears. Technical people, professional people making presentations were reduced to tears under his pressure. I was not one of those reduced to tears. If you weren't broken, you got stronger. And that challenge is really what happened. And I can still remember that moment, and we got through. He wanted to see the map of the software in the system. How was it going to work? And with that, he left. This was like 5 or 6 o'clock. And so I went back to my office and started working on that map. And by 1 o'clock in the morning, I finally had it finished with anger. Damn him anyway. I mean, I really didn't know him. Obviously, he didn't like me. And so I can still remember putting that, and this goes back, like I say, 44 years. I can remember slamming it down on the desk at 1:30 in the morning. There! Proving it, right? I don't know if you ever read it. And in talking to another friend, Jeff, just recently, he had the exact same story. Same pitch, same challenge, same anger in putting it together. So it's a common story. And so it was kind of strange when a number of years later, as I was working in the marketing side for the state of New Jersey as a rep, I got a call asking if I could come help the New Jersey Bell team. And I said, well, I'm already working full-time during the day, and I was transitioning to an education job, so I was stopping at Princeton on my way back from Trenton to get the latest stuff. And then I was studying at night. And they said, well, this is only 5 o'clock in the morning. I was only sleeping at that time anyway. And so with that youthful exuberance, I said, why are you asking me? Well, Mario DiBennedetto says, if you can't figure out something, get Jim Gleason in on it. My God, he really liked me. Well, I don't know. He was giving me a third job at the same time. But nevertheless, it was the first time I had some sense of I wasn't bad, I was good. And so eventually ended up going down to the Commonwealth of Virginia account, meeting Jeff Helm, project manager down there, really great guy. And if I look back right now, I'd say there was a trio of people, Mario, myself, and Jeff. I'm sure there are others who feel the same way, but we found ourselves working very closely together. And so down there, Mario was the one who would come in and review it. And I can still remember in a hotel room, I don't know why I was in the room. It was Jeff and Mario going over the personnel and doing evaluations and so forth. And I was the oddball. But for some reason I was invited. I was sitting on the edge of the bed as they're going over this. And Mario had, honest to God, a black book. And in the black book, he had the names of all those people that he was watching and moving into the right places to grow them. Obviously, I was in that book. And so when Jeff moved on to Arlington, I was in the back seat of the car with Mario in the front seat and Jeff driving when they were discussing his replacement down at the Commonwealth of Virginia account. And it was me. I'm in the back seat. Nobody's asking me. And I finally said, hey, guys, I'm right here. Shouldn't you ask me? Well, do you want it? No. Well, you are. And I had gone down there to understudy Jeff, so it was an obvious progression for me. And from there, I ended up going up to Albany, New York. We're talking about big accounts. One small branch had a quota for one salesman of $34 million. I mean, these are risky stuff. And Mario was the guy who would come in and do the reviews. And so it was a long-term relationship there. And when I first got up there, we had to do quarterly reports of every person that worked in that branch by percentage of their time where they were spending it. That's how you got headcount allocated. I didn't know the people. I couldn't fill out this report. There was nobody in front of me. They'd gone through 4 SA managers just before me. And so I said, I can't do it. Oh, you got to do it. You got to get that report down here. And I can't. And Bob Husbands, another good long-term friend, turned to Mario and said, Mario, give the kid a break. He's right. He can't do it. It would be just garbage. And he backed him down. And so over the time, I was up there, our family was up there for 10 years. And he came up many times to do the reviews. We had a great time. Always appreciated his challenge. And then it was time to move on. Where was I going to go? Detroit? Cleveland? To another office? No. So I sat back and I planned the next step has to be going to home office in Bluebell and settle down for the rest of my career. And so I turned to Mario, as I always did, for advice and consult. And of course I ended up moving down into his organization under Jeff, who worked for him. And so many things happened once we were there in Bluebell. That was 1985. And I can still remember Jeff was a brilliant guy. He came up with ideas of how to resolve the process. And fixing the software when it was broken was one of the expensive process for the company. And Jeff had this concept of peeling an onion. And each flavor of the onion was more expensive resources. And he explained this to his team, and I was the only one that got it. Everybody else was like, huh? When they left, Jeff says, what was I talking? I said, like you're talking Greek to people who only studied English. Did you understand what I said? Yeah. Anyway, short story long, Mario at that point had responsibility for all the software development. And out in Roseville, Minnesota, one day I found myself out there in the early stages of this job with a dump in my hand trying to find out where do dumps go, these were the output of an error, to get resolved. And I'm wandering around and I end up in his area. He was out there doing a review with his team in the office, and I found myself, there's nobody around, they're all in the meeting. And I see him, or he saw me, what are you doing in my area here? Hi, Mario. He's in the middle of a meeting. I'm trying to find out where this dump goes. He's, come here, man. Off the cuff. Explain to these people about the peel and the onion. I turned around the blackboard, I drew an onion, I explained it all. I mean, that's the way he was. He'd throw you into anything. I happened to be totally understanding of it, so I put it together, put the chalk down, and I said, so where does this dump go? He's put on that desk out there. And I walked out. His team's still looking like, what was that? One of the things that I got into at that point was goal setting and writing down your goals. And as a kid, I grew up in Australia for a number of years, and as an adult, I always wondered, what would you like to go back to Australia? And at some point, I said, if you're serious about that, you need to write it down as a goal. I had no way of going to Australia, okay? I wrote it down as a goal. 3 months later, I run into Mario over in the other office there in Bluebell, and he said, oh, I got to say goodbye to you. I said, where are you going? He said, I'm being assigned to be the technical director down in Australia. I said, Mario, I got a goal to go to Australia. If you need somebody down to teach project management, you just have to convince my boss to let me go, pay for the trip, and I'll come. Honest to God, 6 months later, I was in Australia for a week. I called my mother to say, Mom, guess what? I'm going back to Australia. She said, really? I said, yeah. I said, hey, you want to come? At 74, she said, are you serious? I said, I'll have a room. I'll share my meal allowance with you. You've got to pay your own way. She says, okay. Took her 15 seconds. And we end up down in Australia. Mario treated us like royalty. We got to go have dinner at his house. Well, they took us out, he and Rita. And my mother and Rita bonded like this. My mother had been, like Rita was, out of her home country, there with her husband. And so I can still remember later my mother sending care packages to Rita with things that you couldn't buy in Australia. I'm sure you can today, but some type of gum, for example, that she couldn't find. They bonded. It was really special. That's how I got to know Rita. And so then we come back, and in 1994, I took a leave of absence. My heart was failing. I was dying, and so I got a heart transplant. And a couple of months later, I was back to work, and I can still remember one day in the hospital, this huge fruit basket showing up from Mario. I got to tell you, it took us, I gave away a lot of fruit. But that's the kind of guy he was. And so we spent the rest of the years working together, and then he retired, and we maintained a friendship. And so I was lucky enough to be within distance, an hour and a half away from him. And so when I retired in 2005, we kept our regular lunches once every 6 months, whatever. Back in 2000, I had to face prostate cancer, got treated, everything was fine. He was dealing with prostate cancer, we bonded even on that. When my PSAs went up again, he said, "You got to see Dr. Vaughn. He's a great guy. David Vaughn." Turns out that was the guy I originally got advice from, but he reconnected me. And so back on December 4th, for example, last year, I was there in a waiting area, crowded waiting area, and who comes in but Mario and Jennifer. "Hey, what are you doing here?" Last Wednesday, I was in that waiting room again. When I went to see Dr. Vaughn, I always mentioned Mario. I never asked how he was because, patient confidentiality, never say. And I talked about Mario a little bit. David Vaughn never let on that anything was going on. When I got home, it was my reminder to call Mario and say, "Hey, we're due for lunch." And so I left a voice message. And then went off to meetings. When we got home at 10:30 that night, there was a message on the phone. I picked up the phone. It was a message from Jennifer. "Jim, Mario passed away today at 4 o'clock. I must have left my message at 3 o'clock. He wasn't home. That's beside it." And so I stood there. My wife said, "What's the matter?" And I told her. And she knew the name, so I talked about him often. And I cried. And at 11 o'clock at night, I called our friend Jeff Helm down in North Carolina to share with him. And I said, "Yeah, I'm here crying. Think about it." He said, "Well, I'm not going to cry. Not over Mario." There. And so hung up the phone, went to bed. Next day, when he heard the arrangements, I called him again just to let him know, see if there's any way he could get to it. He couldn't. He says, "But he's got to tell you," he says, "I was up all night thinking of Mario, the stories of Mario." And we sat there for half an hour sharing stories of Mario. And I'll just share one of his because I think it's important. He said, we talked about how he was in these presentations. One of Jeff's guys, strong technician, was reduced almost to tears at one of those meetings, just like I described before. Jerry came to Jeff later and said, "You let that go by. If you don't stand up for me, I quit." And so Jeff went to Mario and said, "Mario, you can't do this to people." And they had their first real conflict. Mario was really a mentor for Jeff's development over the years. And he talked him down. He said, "We didn't talk for 3 more years." He said, "I didn't realize how much I had hurt him with that. But when we got back together, he was a changed man. He never did that again." Mario was an inspiration. He was a challenge. He was a colleague and a dear friend. And on behalf of Tom down in Florida, Les up in Albany, Jeff down in South Carolina, and so many more, we offer our condolences to the family. Mario, SOB. We love Jeff. We truly do. And you have to know Jeff to realize, to imagine him saying, "I love this man." And I'd have to agree with him, and I did. Thank you for that opportunity. That was Mario.
Best impression I've ever heard.
Thank you for the pleasure.